Hi, everyone, and welcome to another session of Unpacking Organizations. Shradha, lovely to see you again.
Very nice to see you, Rupert.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.
And today we have a guest in our podcast, Shefali Salwan. Very welcome. And Shefali has been a seasoned professional in HR space, and most recently, she has her own company called CEO Works. And I have gotten chance to connect with Shefali through the world of organization design and the work that we do together. And we're so thrilled to have you join us today, Shefali. So welcome.
Thank
How are
you.
you
It's
doing today?
very well. And this is such a pleasure to talk to Rupert and Shradha. Shradha, I see you as a practitioner in many ways. And Rupert, I see you as, someone who's trying to really make a dent at the universe of human capital. So thank you for what you do.
Thank you.
We get better for it. So thank you.
Thank you, Shefali. So, Shefali, before we start and dive into our common passion topics, we would love to know a little bit more about you. We know about you, but our listeners would love to know more who you are, what's your background, what got you excited about this topic, where did you start? So, anything that you would like to share.
Yeah, happy to. So the way I think about my 30 odd, years, professional years, I think of it in three chunks. The first 10 years, maybe I've lived and worked in large organizations and done HR business partnering. So really doing a more generalist role. I've actually had the opportunity to work in the beginning of my career in financial services, and it's in some ways it helped me think about value creation in a certain way. Right? It is very much the industry of creating money, and it isn't a bad thing to be creating money and creating value. So. That's how my first 10 years was. My second 10 years, or the second era, was perhaps more in expertise roles, where I've done assessments much more deeply, recruitment and talent acquisition more deeply. And then towards the end of that second era, I did diversity and inclusion very deeply. And I was the head of D&I, as it was called, with Unilever in the UK, but it was a global. So I was the global head of D&I for Unilever. So that's, I think, my second era. And my third era was really entrepreneurship. It was trying to do things for myself, but trying. So I had a business of executive coaching, so I reskilled. I started at the bottom of a totem pole because you have to start understanding, and I was a newbie in that world. But I had a business in the UK, then Singapore, and the US. So, and then now, if I think about after that experience of running this smaller company in executive coaching, I had the opportunity to probably work in a larger canvas, and we refounded CEO Works with my good friend Sandy Ogg and my husband, actually, my life partner, Sumit Salwan. So that's what my journey is. But as I was saying, is that innovation always happens when you mix a few things together. And I think I am who I am, and I'm informed because I have not only lived in 5 different countries and I've coached, I think, CEOs of 54 countries. So that's given me a different vantage point. And you'll be surprised that most human beings are same everywhere. It doesn't matter. We all have the same struggles in leadership. But that's one vantage point that I think makes me who I am. And the second is that I'm pretty unashamed to say that I want to have a more flexible world for myself. So I've lots of my pivots have been because I wanted to be there for my children when it was needed, and it's okay. So you can still do a lot with asking for that flexibility. So
I love
that's
that.
me.
Nice.
I love that. And so, Shefali, you now are a co-founder and an entrepreneur, and you have your company CEO Works. Let's start there. Let's start that. I know that the genesis of that organization or that body of work was talent to value, and how do we align talent to value, as it says. So why
Yeah.
don't we start there, that what was the genesis of it, what you guys were thinking the need of, what were the pain points that led to it?
Yeah. So I think that it all started actually way back in early 2000s in Unilever, where there was the stock price had not moved for 10 years. So it was plateaued. Um, and there was a first ever profit warning for such a large company. We were a 50 billion revenue company, globally very well recognized because of the brands that we have. Every household. I think there's a statistic that 80% of households in the world uses a Unilever product. So it's very well known from that perspective. And with that profit warning and the stock price not moving for 10 odd years, it was a paradox, which was that we were seeing Unilever was always a talent factory for many organizations. So if you wanted a new CEO, you wanted somebody, you went and picked up people from the talent academy company, which was Unilever, just like as it was with say Pepsi or P&G or some of these companies. So at least in the CPG FMCG business, this was quite a talent factory. And then the paradox was that, hey, how is it possible that we're seen as an academy company which can give talent to the world, and it's not really made a difference to the share price. And of course, there comes a strategy element. Of course, that's what are the choices you're going to make? What are the levers that you have for growth? And when that exercise was done, it was very apparent that all the growth was going to come from small places or small categories. All our business was run. So if you think about, every business has to run its business, it has to grow its business, it has to change its business. All our amazing talent was stuck in the run the business, where it was already, in the stock price. Selling more margarine was not going to make any, and of course you're not going to sell more margarine because many mothers are not buying more margarine, but it was a very profitable business, and it was large, very, very large. And the way the hierarchy worked for us, the talent wanted to go towards a bigger job, so bigger P&Ls, bigger, authority to go and spend on advertising, etc. But the growth was going to come from small places. So those days, small meant that we were very small in China, for example, 400 million business, vis-a-vis our competitors who are much bigger, or in newer categories, which was personal products rather than foods. And all our talent was locked in a different place. But if you had to grow and create something, you needed amazing talent. So how do you, in a kind of a job evaluation perspective, hey, I'm already a P&L owner of $4 billion myself. How are you getting incentivized to go to a small little area or category, but has huge growth potential? So that was the genesis actually of talent to value. Is value today may be different from value tomorrow, and how do you connect talent to future value? So that was.
It's a fascinating story, and it's also risk, because that small category might have massive potential, but that's not certain. It's like starting a business.
Yes.
We all believe in the potential of a business. We're all born optimists, and if you're working in a large organization like you, maybe you're not that entrepreneur, and having the big role where you've got X billion category and it's margarine all day long, and it's in the margins, the increment, and as you say, it's baked in.
Yeah.
Why take because if you fail there, because if you're a VC, that they say 1 in 10 startups succeed, and you back the one to fund the 9. And so how was that for the talent to say, well, accepting that you might go into that role,
Right.
Yeah.
but actually dealing with the probability that a lot will fail, and that's not a failure on the person's perspective.
Yes. So three things happen, right, in a time like this, Rupert. One is, of course, for people themselves, that they have to take a risk. And the company also has to have a story with that, right? That why would we take a risk on person A who is handling $4 billion but needs to go to a $400 million? You have to have a story. But the interesting thing about that was, if you didn't do something, it was an existential crisis. If you didn't do something, clearly we were going to get broken up and sold to PE. Those days, PE was new. Remember, this is 20 years back. Now, of course, we're all living in that world. But it was an existential crisis. It actually helps sometimes to have that kind of a crisis. And it was there will be, and it even more important, I think, was the allocation of talent, which is not just hierarchical. So one is having leadership teams that we get, because a lot of talent management that we do is at the top. I mean, so much of our time is spent at the top. But through this process of understanding the real work of the pivot, so strategy is one, but unpacking the strategy and deconstructing the strategy into an understanding the work, we realized that there were some roles which were deeper in the organization, which is going to make the difference. There was 56 roles, actually, which was going to bend the curve for Unilever. Yes. So if for example, that the personal products, right? We were going to do a lot more work in personal products, and we were going to launch in a certain seamless manner, Dove, which was going to be we used to be able to launch a new Dove in 1.6 countries in the world in 1 year together. And we had to make a much faster. So when you relaunch, and we made some organization design changes, etc. But the role of a personal product category head became really, really important, but it wasn't sitting on the top of the table. Right. So that would be an example. Or in Asia, if you were growing in China, and India was always big, but you wanted to grow more in India as well. So the org structure at that point in time was India and China reported to a head of Asia reported to a head of Asia and Africa, and then reported to the CEO, right? So, and not to say that we were going to change everything, but what we were able to do was the China role, we also put on the leadership team, just because it became so important. That we didn't change the reporting line, because there's some, that makes some sense. If you're running a business, you can't keep changing, but you have some interventions for where it could be roles which are deeper down in the organization. So that
you were
is
changing the ways of working and accountability and getting people together for decision making in a different way, rather than actually taking or making changes to their reporting.
Yeah, exactly. So operating model was a big shift at that time when the transformation happened. The category structure was born out of that, because, again, you really needed the scale. So you needed to be thinking about advertising in one way for all Dove versus India separate, Brazil separate, whatever separate, right? So the ways of working changed completely. Right.
And did you do changes in role design, so changing accountabilities and really hone in what are the competencies required to be really effective in this role, because it's new?
Yeah, so absolutely. So our mantra is that actually the execution risks, once you start understanding the work much more deeply, and the work doesn't happen in isolation, it has to land in a role. So our heart of our process really says that allocating disproportionately in certain roles, because they're so important for that S curve or that growth curve, which is, you have to break the hierarchy. That's one. But the second piece is that the execution risk lies outside of the talent right, Rupert? So it is about the work itself, the challenge of the work. And this is what we keep saying. Entrepreneurship, or when you start a company, it's so risky because you're doing something new, right? Or you're going to compete with something which is you're disrupting. So the work challenge is really important. So we often use the metaphor that, that's where the value leakage happens. You're going to climbing Mount Kilimanjaro and going to climb Mount Everest. There will always be more risk at Mount Everest, whether you like it or not. So how do you mitigate for some of the risks at the work itself? And then most importantly, in our context of the role, I think our emphasis on role more than even the talent, right? Are you giving them decision rights or asking them go and keep influencing your way to glory by taking a begging bowl? Or do you have any budgets, or are you going to do the same? Do you have the resources that so if you're going to launch Dove, and all the resource, all the budgets are sitting on not in the category function but in the region, then how are you going to launch?
Yeah.
Right? So you're just not enabling success in the context.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we blame the talent for it.
And that's where I would say that the false attribution of blaming the talent for everything is such an inherent characteristics of our organization. We say that the talent is not able to perform, but we have not given them the right resources and the ecosystem for them to perform. And that is such a vicious cycle, because you then replace the talent and then the same thing happens again.
Exactly. And yeah, Shradha, you've heard me say this. You can put Jesus Christ, or you can put Lord Krishna, whichever God you believe in, or goddess, actually, in my case. But that person's going to fail because they're never enabled to succeed. And our researchers, because we've done so many of this role kind of evaluation analysis, that 70% of the execution risk lies outside of the talent. So, I mean, think about it. All our conversation is about the talent and competencies. By the way, not to say competencies are not important, but that in itself cannot be.
Right.
Totally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
That's fascinating. 70%, I just have to repeat that. 70% of the execution risk lies outside of the talent.
Yeah.
And if I cross that statistic with the other most cited statistic, which is 80% of transformations fail, and then I look at where 99, and that's a statistic I just made up on the spot. So I think they say 42% of statistics are made up, and including this one, which is 99% of the conversations are about the talent.
Yeah.
And we just have the wrong people.
Yeah.
So everyone's arguing, do we have the right talent? And then 70% of the time, the issue is actually not the talent. It's
outside of it.
The design, it's the role and how you've constructed these. It's really fascinating. The other thing that I take away from your story is you had a really strong case for change.
Yeah.
You had a very well articulated, we have the best people, we're producing the talent for the universe, but it's not reflected in our share price. And why is that? It's because we're just majoring on the big ones. And there was a systemic reason, because all the focus was on the big categories and maintaining that, which was baked in. And so what's lovely from the story is you had a very clear case for change. You say personal products, small categories, there's risk. We need then design around that. So you had a very clear strategy for addressing a clear challenge. And then, you approached it in a very systemic way by the sounds of things. And linking talent to the value. What is the value? What is the strategy? So that the arc of that story is very clear and it's not complicated.
It isn't. It isn't at all, actually. And back to new playbooks, right, Rupert? So when you think about a business leader, so you're a CEO, of a company, and often you have a clock. In private equity, it's more direct. You have a whole period, 4 years, 3 to 4 years. But even publicly listed large companies, new CEOs are given only that much time,
True.
Yeah.
And it's
right?
becoming shorter.
It is
And
becoming short.
Yeah.
it is becoming shorter. And the thing is about big, large transformations keep failing. We know that. But have we tried some more precise transformations? And Talent to Value has this major emphasis on let's start moving with those critical roles which you by breaking the hierarchy. And
Yeah.
and it's not a very neat way, because HR professionals normally like to make everything very fair and everything very neat, but that comes in the way actually of moving fast.
Amazing.
It's very telling. I think we have been talking about that, Rupert, that, we
Forever.
need to think through beyond the authority and consensus driven approach to everything, that everybody is good, everybody's role is important. It's not about differentiating people, but actually identifying that what role is more important for value creation. So I know we are getting towards the countdown of our timer. Before we start to wrap up, Shefali, we would love to ask you the question is that what are some of the tools, or what is one tool that is very dear to your heart as you do this work?
So I don't know if it's a tool, but for me, it's the concept of always starting with how the company makes money, how is value creation. And it keeps changing, by the way. That's the interesting part about it. The way Google made money 5 years back, or how, it just keeps changing. That's really, really important to understand. So I just did a org design for a scale up, which was literally $50 million company, which is going to become 400 million in 2 years. So think about the trajectory and the scale up. And it is getting into a new business, of course. There's a big pivot. So it has a contractual business. It's getting into a consumer business. So think of it B2B versus B2C. And when we started looking at the strategy, if you look at the strategy and the house diagram and everything, you would never know actually what the enterprise value would be for the consumer business. On paper, it was okay, consumer business is a new business. But when you start looking at the value creation aspect of it and enterprise value, the consumer business is 8 times more valuable than the contractual business. And if I were to do the org structure without knowing that, that I would have had to change it in 6 months. In any case, I'm changing it because it's evolving as a scale up. But oh my God, if I didn't know that the consumer business was 8 times more valuable, I would be making all kinds of mistakes.
That's very
That's a tool
powerful.
that we use all the time. That please don't understand it. And I mean value and money, not just for for-profit organizations. So this could be used by so World Bank uses talent to value, but obviously their value is defined differently. So as
Sure.
long as
You
Sure.
understand
right,
how you're delivering value.
yeah,
You can be local government providing services to your citizens. You're still adding value.
yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And what is one
And
trap, Shefali?
one trap.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, one trap, Shefali.
So the trap I find is that far too quickly, when you do anything in our world, people start doing things because of old grooves, right? So organization structure, how many times business leaders will say, okay, I can draw it on the back of a napkin for you. Right. So or oh my God, before we understand the how money is getting created, or what is the work, because work is different for every organization, which even with their strategy, right? P&G versus Unilever in China, work is completely different. So understanding the work, but people don't have, they very quickly want to go and draw boxes on a back of a napkin, and they start putting people's name, and you have to keep saying no, please understand the work differently, understand the context, enable success in the role, and then think about the person.
Amen, Shefali. You're preaching to the absolute converted on the, and
In
it's
fact,
such
we
a
have
common
like
trap.
Right. And we have episodes coming on it of what not to do. So fact pack designs or designing for people. So you are absolutely, this is not scripted. We did not give the seeds to Shefali, but we are totally in mind meld. Well, this was absolute pleasure, Shefali. Thank you so much for taking out time and being part of us and talking to us for this passionate topics that we all share.
Shefali, thank you. I've learned so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Take care. Until next time. Bye.
Unpacking Organizations, the Practitioners Podcast. Sponsored by Orgvue.